Welcome to Curtain Call, the show where we go behind the curtain on the stars of the culture wars. I'm your host, Alexandra Marshall, and today we are joined by the Atheist pastor. So welcome to Curtain Call. It is wonderful to have you here today. Normally you are the one interviewing me.
Yeah, it's actually nice to be on the other side of the fence. It's I guess the pressure's off me today. I think the pressure's off me.
No, you're completely wrong. The pressure is going to be higher because we're going to talk about you, because you are one of our stars of the culture wars, and a star that perhaps this particular audience might not have come across. So you are the Atheist pastor, and you have your own talk show on YouTube in which you interview other people. Do you want to tell us just a little bit about yourself first so that this audience can get acquainted with you?
Yeah, sure. I'll give you the very short version because I don't want to put the audience to sleep. I guess my background, I've always had a background in politics, and funnily enough, always had an interest in religion. I actually studied a Bachelor of Theology and Ministry with the intention of becoming a pastor, and during that time deconverted to, deconverted to atheism, for lack of a better term. But my interest in politics, I guess, it never waned. I think there's an impression that I guess amongst the atheist or the secular community, it's a bunch of hardcore lefties, and while I've certainly experienced that, I found there actually are a lot of people who are, I guess, are like-minded. I guess, conservative minded. But what I did discover was there wasn't really a place that those people could go. There wasn't really somewhere where everyone could just get together. So I started my channel with that in mind. Actually, my first video I was ever did was, can you be a conservative and an atheist? And it's sort of grown from there. And I guess I do a bit of a mix of mainly community programming. So it's a lot of stuff for the atheist community. I guess I'm using the skill set that I was ironically taught as I was learning or studying to become a pastor, I guess, to help people who are in the atheist community and are a little bit lost, but certainly, a big emphasis on people who are probably finding themselves feeling a little bit alone in a very politicized community.
Well, I'm actually very excited to interview you because I am also an atheist and a conservative. Now, that's actually quite common in Australia. That's there are a lot of atheists who, they might not go around declaring themselves as being irreligious, but they are. And they also fall on the conservative side of politics. But over in the US, and with the large market of people that I talk to on a regular basis, that is not the norm at all. If you are a conservative or even if you're a Democrat, you tend to be religious. So that community over there is quite small, and I'm sure that you've found the same thing in your travels online.
Look, it's the difference between, I guess, look, I think conservative thought is always fairly similar. I think it's, I guess the principles like, freedom of speech, small government, the core principles of conservatism, I think, are the same. But it's interesting how intertwined religion is in the US political system on both sides. I don't think that anyone could possibly be an atheist in the United States and ever expect to win certainly high office. In Australia, I remember when I was studying, what they told us in Bible college was around about 10% of people in Australia are church-going Christians, and realistically, half of them are probably actually people who are engaging or believing and not just going through the process. So we are very much a secular country in Australia. And that being said, we we don't have any problems electing conservative governments, or certainly right-leaning governments. So I think that does tell you that there is certainly, within the secular community, there is certainly an appetite for right-wing thought and for conservative thought. It's just what I found is the left tends to be a little bit louder. They tend to scream. They tend to, and even not so much the majority of the left, but a small minority of the left that seem to scream and give the impression that they're the only voice, they're the majority. When in fact they actually aren't. There is, you don't see, if everyone voted along those lines, well, you'd have a Greens government in Australia with about 90% of the vote.
Yes, well, there is a large confusion between secular, which is what we are, and Marxist. And I find that when you're talking to a predominantly religious audience, they seem to confuse being a Marxist with being an atheist. And if you're not Christian, then therefore you must be a Marxist. Now, in my own personal experience, I went to a Christian school, a private girls' school. So did most of my friends who went to different private girls' schools. And the majority of those girls are still Christian. A lot of them go to church. Some of them are pastors with their pastors' wives, and they're raising kids in that community. And they're all Marxists. They might not describe themselves as Marxists, but they stand behind the Marxist causes. They go and protest on the streets. They uphold and defend all the Marxist philosophies on their social media accounts. And they are religious. But all the people that I knew at school who were not religious, they are free market capitalists. They are in favor of free speech. And so my experience of reality as far as this Marxist community that we have growing in Australia is not that it is one of atheists. It seems to be one of predominantly, well, it's just a mix. Like you could be religious or irreligious, but it's definitely a mixed bag of religions and irreligions inside that cause. Do you find that as well, that it's not, being an atheist doesn't mean that you're going to be a Marxist?
Well, it's funny because I don't know if I mentioned I didn't mention this earlier, but I was actually a candidate for the Liberal Party at the federal election and the New South Wales state election as well, in a very safe Labor seat. So I was never ever a chance of winning. But when I was approached, because I was approached out of the community because I headed up local chambers of commerce and had done, I'm fairly active in my community down south here. And one of the things I was concerned about when I was approached to run was I said, well, just to let you know, because I was known previously as someone who was a Christian, obviously, in the community, and I said, look, I'm an atheist, and I'm very strong on that. I don't want to things that where religion's involved. I may not support certain issues, and it was almost like a bit of a slight chuckle, and it was that'll be all right. And what I actually found was the majority of people I was dealing with, they were either nominal Christians or they were just completely non-religious like myself. So it's interesting, but then it's also interesting what you said about the left, because if you have a look at the left, there's certainly been a bit of a change in the demographic of who the left is, and I think even who's supporting the right. And I think it's the seat of Warringah is a classic example of that. I mean, that's Zali Steggall's probably one of the most left-wing candidates that you could have outside the Greens party, and the people of Warringah who have traditionally supported Tony Abbott have elected her, and I think that shows that there is a shift in the demographics. So I think a lot of they call them the doctors' wives, but I think a lot of those people who are traditionally Christian, traditionally going to churches, their viewpoint is shifting a lot more to the left. I remember even one of the churches I went to, one of the pastors, he was a full-blown Green supporting left-wing activist. That's what he was doing Monday to Saturday, and then on a Sunday he was putting his hands in the air, and he was a youth pastor. So, which was concerning. He was a youth pastor at the same time with those views. But it's a funny perception, and I think the atheist community allows that perception to happen because a lot of the people who are in senior roles within the atheist community, they don't treat the positions with respect. They don't. I think any position that you hold where it's you're representing a community, you have to be apolitical. You can't get behind a candidate in either way. I know that certainly when I was involved with the business chamber movement, even though unashamedly a member of the Liberal Party, I absolutely had to keep neutral because I had to work with members of the Labor Party. I had to occasionally have meetings with even the Greens to try and get things done. And I think within the atheist community, there is that lack of professionalism within, not all, but some of the organisations where I think especially over the last few months, the entire atheist cause has been dedicated more to getting rid of Donald Trump and talking about how bad Scott Morrison is, rather than actually confronting issues that the secular community might find important.
Well, that would be because let's not forget that the atheist community isn't exactly an organised group. It's not like the atheists go and text each other every weekend and go, we're going to get together. Most atheists never engage themselves with other atheists in a community. It's sort of, I know for the most of the people I have met who are atheists, they don't even talk about it. They don't even form conversations with their friends. It's never a consideration in their life. It's just something that they are, but it's not part of their politics. They're far more likely to say, I'm a liberal or I'm a member of the Nats party than I'm an atheist, because it's sort of, for most of Australia's history, it hasn't been that important in the last 50 years. It's not like you have to go to church, or if you don't, then you're going to get excluded from these things. Even to send your kids to a private school, which is religious, they don't really care. As long as you pay.
No, well,
they have no interest. So it's not.
Yeah, I was going to say I'm actually looking at high schools. My oldest is in the 5th grade, and we're looking at high schools for her at the moment. And one that we're actually considering and we'll probably send it to is a Catholic girls' school. And I don't come from a Catholic background, but as far as the education that it looks like they offer, it's good. And I say that as I'm a staunch atheist in my personal views. But by the same time, I have no problems with my daughter learning about world religions, Catholicism, Christianity. I mean, it is a part of our society, and it has been a part of our society. And I think it's important that we don't forget that the role that religion has played, I guess, not only in Australia, but in Western civilization and Eastern civilization, all throughout the world. You're pretty hard pressed to find somewhere that hasn't had an impact because, be it good or bad, but I think mostly good from religion. I think it's very easy to forget that.
Absolutely. The study of religion is fascinating, and it is a part of human culture. I know personally, as a writer, I find the evolution of the stories of how humans developed and changed religion over times and areas, I find that personally fascinating. And in religious schools, if you're not religious in Australia, for those who don't know overseas, basically they stick you in one class together, and they don't really expect you to pay attention in that class, but as long as you attend it, they're okay with that. They're more worried about whether or not you do well in maths, English and science, because it looks better on your school.
Funnily enough, one of the things I used to do was actually teach a scripture class, and because I'd studied it, and I'm actually at the moment when I'm not running my businesses, I'm actually studying history with the plans of doing a PhD in history, in particular Australian history. So I've always had that background and looking at more when I was in the Christian world, the apologetic side of things. So what they used to do was there was a selective public school, like public high school that I used to do scripture at, and they graded the kids between 1 and 5. 1 being they're a full-blown going to church, hands in the air, they love Jesus, to 5, this is all garbage, my parents are making me go to this and I just want to sit here and argue with you. I always got the 5th one. So I always, it was funny. I always got those ones. And I always used to think, why don't you just go to non-religion or something? But it was always a lot of fun. And the irony is, I spent years trying to convert those kids, and now here I am as the atheist pastor.
Was there a category for people like me who were actively going out of their way to write brilliant essays that got full marks, disproving it? Was there a category for just the petulant kids?
You would have been in my class, yeah.
Yeah.
You would have absolutely been in my class.
Would have been me. No, so to bring it back to the culture wars itself. So we've established really that, and in reality in Australia, most atheists, like 90% of them, don't talk about it. They're families and kids and business people, and a lot of them are liberals, a lot of them are conservatives. But we seem to have our conversation and our perception dominated by a narrow band of loud left-wing Marxists, and that's just because they are the loudest about everything. The same thing happened to the conversation about women, where our rights and desires and needs are controlled by this tiny Me Too movement. So if you want to try and work out how that sort of thing can happen and how a group can be defined by a minority, it's exactly the same thing that happened to women. Same for people, they did it to the atheist community. But
that's the method that they take, though. I mean, that's the Marxist method. What they do is they find these causes where they think there's a minority. I mean, it's every time there's a protest for something, you see some clown with a Socialist Alliance and a Greens thing. They'll protest anything. But what they do is they infiltrate a very small portion of a community, and I guess the atheist community is an example, and probably the LGBT community is another example where they made out as if everyone became an ally all of a sudden. It's the atheist community became an ally to the LGBT community, also an ally to this community. That we're allied apparently to extreme climate change, to anti-capitalism. But that's what they do. What they do is they infiltrate and take control of a lot of these organizations, scream as if they're the representatives of those organizations, and then ally with everyone. In the atheist community at the moment, and this is something that absolutely baffles me, and it's something happening in the US, the atheist community is allied with the polytheist community. So the people who believe in Zeus and all because they have a mutual dislike for Donald Trump. So because and it's completely political, and I've sat there and said, why are we having it's as far as I'm concerned, a religious view is a religious view. I mean, as an atheist, I don't differentiate. Well, I say I don't differentiate between, say, Christianity and polytheism, but I think I can understand why people culturally will follow Christianity, or depending on where they were born, as a religion. I think when people are saying that they believe in Zeus, I usually just think it's a bit of an attention-seeking thing, because I don't think seriously anyone could say that Zeus or Thor or any of the ancient.
Unless it was 2,000 years ago, in which case it was deadly serious.
Absolutely, 2,000 years ago, that's fine. But in modern society, no, it's a ridiculous thought. But it's so. But I mean, as far as I'm concerned, for an atheist, I mean, the polytheists believe in more gods than the Christian community or the Muslim community. Or why are we suddenly allied with them? It makes absolutely no sense. But the reason that we're allied with them is because a small group that have infiltrated, that really don't care about atheist or secular issues at all, but are essentially Marxist, are basically taking control.
You're not going to find these group of people, just so that our viewers know, these aren't the people that you're going to see down listening to an atheist convention having chats about theology, or they're just the same group of Marxist kids who hate the world, want to protest everything, and so they just throw that into the mix. Now, I don't know about you, but I often have online the most interesting and kind of hilarious problem where I get attacked from the left. The first they start with is, oh, you're a Bible basher if I'm talking about politics, not realizing, of course, that I'm not religious at all in the first place. So they get stopped in their tracks. If you come up and you're a conservative and you're an atheist, then a lot of the left don't know what to do with you, because you hold some of their views, but not all of their views. So there's no nuance in the left as far as people having different political opinions.
It has been interesting, though.
Sometimes I get unfollowed by Christians if they find out that I'm an atheist, although that's not happening so much anymore. So now I think this is my whole goal of the culture wars, is to try and explain to conservatives that we have a huge problem coming up, and that is Marxism and the rise of Marxism. And they are a dangerous political religion. So Marxism, it tries to use its leaders to replace other philosophies inside its organization. And it requires its followers to be devout and to place the Marxist political cause above their own family. That's why they take people's children and try and educate them. They see you as, it's almost a cult. And so political religions, not all politics are religious, but Marxism and communism is very much a political religion. You can see it with the worship of North Korean leaders. They actually worship as gods. Xi Jinping is basically worshipped as a god when they're raising children in the schools there, and you demand absolute subservience. So with a person who's an atheist online, it's very difficult for both the left and the right to separate the idea of religion and politics. And so my goal is to explain to Christians that we're all on the same side, and not to prejudge someone who doesn't have a religion as also being somehow a political Marxist, because they're so different. And if we start isolating and dividing this community up and attacking each other, we're going to be basically conquered by this political nightmare of Marxism. Do you sort of experience the same thing and have the same fears?
Look, see, I've had some mixed experiences. I guess one thing I like doing, and it's always been something I've enjoyed, is I like having conversations with people who think differently to the way I do, because I like to understand, even it doesn't have to be a debate, or it doesn't have to be, everyone agreeing at the end, but I just like to be able to understand where the other side comes from. And I think through what I've been doing, because I mean, look, the majority of my audience is left, but I've been able to have some interesting conversations, and I think I've been able to change the perception of what a conservative is, because we're so demonized in the Twitter world. We're all far right leaning fascists. If you don't support Bernie Sanders, essentially. But I guess as far as I've had some interesting interactions within, I guess, the Christian community. There is often a bit of a shock when people discover that I hold conservative values. I'll normally get you get attacked for being a Bible basher, whereas they call me a far left communist just by the virtue of the fact that I'm not religious, which couldn't be further from the truth. I'm a very loud and proud conservative, and I'm very open about being a conservative. So there's generally a lot of surprise and a bit of confusion, especially when it comes to people in the United States. But some of the conversations I've had, look, there's interesting conversations. I guess some people just automatically make assumptions and try and shut me down. But then some people will listen. I mean, it's leaving religion, I guess, probably gave me a few, scars. When I left, it wasn't a particularly nice experience, and in particular, there was a lot of people who probably didn't treat me particularly kindly on the way out. So I guess there was a little bit of a period where I was what you'd call an angry atheist. But I think in general, when you have the conversations with most people who are Christian, they understand. A lot of people will try and convert me back, which I'm not real. I mean, I love having theological conversations, but that's not how you engage with an atheist. So it's a good friend of mine. He's Christian, and he's been through a lot of journeys with me. He's very much on this political spectrum, the same, probably a little bit to the right of me, actually. But, and we used to do a lot of things back in the day. It's I was actually, and this is going back, it feels like a lifetime ago, but 10 years ago, I was a member of the Christian Democrats, and me and this friend, we recorded a series of interviews with Fred Nile, and we did a lot within that group. He actually, I think he did the original design for the Canberra Declaration website. I think he put that together. So we did a lot of things like that. And it's funny because I still have some really good conversations with this guy, but it's never about religion. He's always just maintained that friendship. And recently he, because I'm looking to put a website together for what I do, and I'd sort of mentioned that to him, and asked him for anyone he could recommend, thinking that being as devout a Christian as he was, he wouldn't want to do anything, I guess, like that. But he actually offered to do the whole thing for free, because he said, as a friend, and he still believes that at some point I'll come back to religion. But there has been a lot of kindness and compassion in the Christian community, I guess, and that's one of the examples that I've seen that's probably softened my heart a little bit towards Christianity in general. And I think, and also the realization that, hey, at one point I used to be the person who was insanely religious. So I guess it's, once people realize that, this has been a really long roundabout answer, sorry. Once people realize that I'm not this loud, I hate all religion kind of atheist wanting to, denounce capitalism and, destroy their right to, the Christians' right to assemble, we can generally have some productive conversations. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I've noticed that most of the atheists that I've run into, they actually want to preserve the culture and traditions of our Christian heritage. They're the ones, they'll go and sing carols at candlelight. They'll always engage, and they love Christmas and at Easter, although our family we do a little bit of pagan bonfire stuff because we're on a farm, but we still completely support people's right to assembly and religion, and we believe faith is an important part of other people's lives, not ours in particular, but so long as religious belief doesn't impact the laws of our country or start preventing people from having liberty, then we're perfectly fine with it. And that's the majority opinion that I come across in Australia, that we actually support religious communities, and that's why I'm so passionate about making sure Christian Porter doesn't pass his religious discrimination laws, because they actually discriminate against religious and irreligious people. That's why I fight against it, because it takes
I've got a slightly different opinion on that, but I know that's still a work in progress, and I guess I'll be interested to see the final draft. But look, see, I hold a slightly different. I don't necessarily know if it's, and I often hear that Australia is formed on Judeo-Christian values. I think it's more formed on Western values, and I just think that Christianity's been a part of it.
We're very much part of the old liberty ideas that have come from mostly our wars to survive all the invaders that came into England. That's where a lot of our ideas of liberty actually come from. They don't come from religion. They come from trying to survive this melting pot of armies that were all coming into Europe and all these different people trying to survive. And a lot of people don't understand that that's actually the heart of English liberty. It's not.
And even prior to that, you can go back further to Greek democracy, and it's similar things. They were always warding off the invaders. Whether it was Athens is a great example. They were always fighting the Persians or the Spartans or a number of groups. But that's where I think that's where our society initially evolved from, and obviously as that culture sort of spread throughout Europe, and I think that's sort of it's I guess, for lack of a better term, it's evolved to where it is today. And I certainly think that Christianity has played a part in that. I think that it's interesting you mentioned pagan traditions. I think a lot of the traditional Christmas traditions, there's a lot of pagan influence in that. I mean, things like the Christmas tree. I mean, that's originally a pagan fertility ritual that was held on the winter solstice.
Easter's the pagan fertility event, and we all know that when a religion comes into an area, it uses the same celebration dates in order to make the transfer of power easier for the people.
And a lot of the time that's also just by virtue of the fact that it's when the seasons change. That's one thing that humanity tended to do when the seasons change. So Christmas is on the winter solstice, for instance. So that's a big seasonal ceremony that was held in a number of different cultures. I mean, throughout the world, but in particular in Western society. So it's very easy to, I guess, transplant things from one to the other. I mean, even if you have a look at, say, a place like Mexico, where they do things like the Day of the Dead. That's certainly not a Christian tradition by any stretch of the imagination. It's very much got its roots in other religions, but it's very much a part of the culture there, and as is Catholicism in Mexico.
They had to meld Catholicism into their old religion. It was that's probably one of the best examples of literally a copy paste. Let's hope that works. But
and seemingly it does.
It does. But it's a brilliant. The story of religion is a brilliant story, but we're getting away slightly from the culture wars, which is what we find ourselves in now. And so my point and purpose is you're doing almost the other side of what I'm doing. I'm sort of an atheist in a Christian community, and you're an atheist in a Marxist sort of far left community, trying to be the conservative over there. Do you see any hope that left-wing community can become less hostile toward conservatives when they understand that you hold similar views in some respects to them, even if you don't hold all of their views? Or do you think that they are quite agitated? Like, I've seen the conservative community who are Christian, absolutely, once you start talking to them, once they get to know you, I've seen a complete change in how they behave around someone who is secular, when they understand that not all secular people are violent Marxists. So I have hope for the culture wars on this side of the fence. But what about you? What about your side of the fence?
Look, it's interesting. For a lot of people, I'm the first conservative that they ever talk to, because there's, especially within, I guess, the Twitter world, which is, I guess, mainly where I interact with people in the atheist community. The Twitter world is if you were to think that was reality, I mean, it's the far left. So there's to be a conservative in that world, as you'd well know, it's almost like you're a pariah. You know, you're seen as this extreme, far right, horrible, you know, baby killing, evil person. So for a lot of people, I guess, approach me with, I guess, an assumption about what I think and what I believe, and funnily enough, when we actually have conversations, we find that there's a lot that we have in common. I think a lot of people who are on the left are probably closer to the centre than the extreme. But the problem is where the influence is coming from, and the only voices they're hearing are from the extreme left, from that Marxist left, you know, telling them that things like, you know, capitalism's bad, and, you know, the 1% are ruling everything, you know, not understanding the reality of how economics works, you know, just sort of what, you know, whatever the 20-year-old with a placard screams.
Hundreds. They haven't evolved their ideas from these very early systems, and they have no idea how capitalism really works and how they're able to buy their iPhone and why they're allowed to be in their parents' basement of a mansion. They don't understand it. They don't get it.
Exactly, and I think I always sort of roll my eyes a bit when people talk about how bad off they are, especially people in the United States, actually, on the left, talking about how bad it is, you know, how terrible the way they act. You'd think that they were, you know, living in a third world country where, you know, they had no rights and they were, you know, just virtually in a war zone. And well, I mean, depending on where you live, there has been a few war zones in the US, but that's been caused by the left. I don't think they realise how good they've got it, though. I mean, there are people who are starving in the world. There are people who there's a reason that so many people are trying to, you know, cross borders illegally to get into, you know, the United States, you know, Australia. It's because we're good countries with good systems where everyone actually has a really good opportunity to lead a good life. I mean, this is out of any time in history. I think that the best place that you could live is probably modern day Australia, because you know, the freedoms that we do have, the opportunity we do have, but places like the United States are a similar example. I mean, I'd rather live in the United States than, you know, 1500s England, or, you know, 1600s Asia, or 1700s Africa. It's the world and Western society is the best that has ever existed, and I hope it just continues to grow, because it's a really great place. And why you would want to bring in 19th century industrial revolutionary ideas from, you know, a crackpot in Germany, you know, that has failed everywhere in the world. I mean, it's communism and Marxism has not succeeded anywhere in the world. I mean, people point to China. I mean, China's had to go to a more capitalist system because they realize that communism doesn't work.
And China doesn't work as well as people think it works. It's still massively divided between rich and poor. And the people who are reasonably wealthy in the middle class in China have no freedom. If you don't smile the right way, you lose your ability to travel. Your kids can't go to school. You have no job. So you are trapped in a prison of your own thoughts. And not only that, like, Xi Jinping is not this quiet leader. He killed tens of thousands of political rivals and their families to get to power, and no one.
Look at what they're doing to the Uyghur Muslims. I mean, look at what's happening to them. It's an absolute disgrace where they're just rounding people up. And I mean, it's okay. Obviously, as an atheist, you know, I don't like Islam at all. I think it's probably one of the most dangerous religions currently in the world, mainly because of the adherence in certain regions.
It's a political religion like communism is, where it takes over the entirety of life and your system. So it doesn't stay in a corner, and it's not spiritual, it's everything, which is why it is dangerous.
But the way that the Uyghur people in China are being treated, it's tantamount to genocide. I mean, yeah, have a look at what happened to Tibet. They just went in and completely just destroyed a civilization. This is what they do, and yeah. I don't think it's a coincidence that all of a sudden we've had this virus, and I don't want to sound like a conspiracy nut here, because I'm certainly not one, but I don't think it's a coincidence that this virus suddenly comes out of China. Then all of a sudden China's prepared for it, sells things over, you know, to help all these other countries get out of the virus that came from there, and at the same time quietly moves into Hong Kong and quietly starts making all these other political moves around the world, while I guess everyone's distracted looking at something else. That the Chinese government is evil.
Yeah, the one thing people don't realize about China is they have a list of plans for things like contingency plans. So they have, 15 or 20 fully fledged plans of, if a virus gets out, we initiate plan number 4. And so it looks like it's all scaled. So, I actually think it's probably got out by accident. I know they were playing with it, but, the lab was decided as dodgy, and that's why the Canadians got out of it. They actually issued complaints about the state of the lab. But as soon as it got out, China would have had plans in place of, okay, well, how can we capitalize on this mistake? And off they go. And people don't realize that they are well prepared to sacrifice pretty much anything for their final pursuit, which is to become the global dominant force.
Just the fact that they prevented domestic travel, but then allowed people to travel overseas, knowing that this virus, I mean, that is not responsible global citizenship.
Remember Hug a Chinese person in Italy? They had that whole campaign about Hug a Chinese. People where was the biggest outbreak initially in Europe? Italy.
In Italy. Well, I mean, Nancy Pelosi going to Chinatown to, because racist Donald Trump was stopping, who was closing the borders. I remember when, even in Australia, when the Chinese students were meant to be coming back, and they were saying no, or they were sending them offshore to quarantine. And all the hardcore lefties, it's racist and evil Liberal Party, and how can they do this? When the reality is that probably saved us from it being a lot worse than it was. And even in the United States, closing the borders at the time that they did prevented it from being a much worse disaster than it has been.
I 100% agree with you. And I'll try and wrap it up soon because I know I've kept you for a while. But I find you had an interesting point there back a few minutes ago, which was this idea of the virus going out and how people reacted to it, and this country and this world being the safest it has ever been. I have observed that this safety net and this perception of nothing will ever happen to people, the cotton wool helicopter generation of kids, my generation and the generation before it, and to an extent, my older brother's generation, who's about 40, have not had major wars on their home ground. They've not had bad pandemics go through. Now, if we look at history, every century, we get about 6 to 10 major pandemics that kill a large percentage of the population. We have wars that used to kill, a third of a town or a village on a semi-regular basis. And so death and our own mortality used to be a big deal, and people were aware of how fragile life was. And even given that, what they used to do was fight for the upholding of their liberties and their political systems, because they valued their freedom. They knew what life looked like when you weren't free and how much worse it was. But now, given how safe we are and how stable our country is, we panicked at the first sign of trouble and gave all of our freedoms away. It was basically just a scratch, not even a Band-Aid wound. And what do you think about that sort of perception of safety having an impact on our sort of misuse of freedom, and we don't seem to care about it?
I think there needs to be a balance, and I think it's a common sense approach. I think things were probably closed down where they didn't need to be, and there was a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction. I guess at the time there was a lot of unknown, and I guess I can appreciate that. And look, ultimately, I mean, we've got a situation now where we haven't eradicated it, but we've really got it under control here, especially when you compare to the rest of the world. I remember when it first came out, my family, we made the decision that even if we didn't like some of the rules, we were just going to go with it. And that was originally that was what we thought is probably just the best thing to do. And we followed it all and did the best we could. I think if they were to try and enforce a lockdown on us now, though, I think I would have a fairly different opinion and stance on it, because I don't think lockdowns work. I feel so sorry for the people in Victoria. I mean, what happened in Victoria was just it was an overreach.
Half at the moment of the small business community in Victoria have been wiped out. These are family businesses that are 3 and 4 generations long. They reckon about 2/3 of them will end up being wiped out by the time this is done. And I know hundreds of families who've lost everything they've ever worked for. All their staff are basically looking at losing their houses. And it's when you get past the public face of it all, the actual trauma and tragedy that's gone on is extraordinary, and we won't see it properly laid out until after this federal government stops handing out money. Then we'll see
it's going to last for years.
yeah, then we'll see what really happened. And when you lose your entire life's work, your own work, not working for somebody else, but your own business that you built, and your savings wiped out and you can't start again, that will lead to longer mental health issues and possibly fatal issues in the next 10 to 15 years, where people simply can't cope with what happened to them. And there's not really enough discussion about, or there wasn't enough care about what that would actually lead to when happened. Is when they were judging risk, they didn't think about how fragile our systems were.
There probably wasn't enough time for a lot of planning when it came to that. And I've only actually just recently stepped down as the president of one of the chambers of commerce down here in the Illawarra. But I've sort of sat on business advisory boards and for the region, and I have had a lot of conversations with a lot of, especially small to medium business owners. A lot of them are suffering. A lot of them don't see a path back. I mean, even for myself, my business was digital marketing, and we dealt exclusively with pubs, clubs, and restaurants. So you can imagine that one day I had a thriving business, and the next day I didn't have a single client because they were all forced to shut down. And even now, as they're reopening, the financial impact that it's had on a lot of these businesses, especially once the handouts stop, it's going to be something that lasts for quite a long time.
Well, politically,
and that's where
my point was that our demographics are changing culturally. So if we're going to be culture warriors, we're going to have a large group of people who either don't have jobs or don't have homes and are relying on the state, and a state that has now been empowered. And we've got a young group of people, a large group of voting people who are basically Marxists, who are going to encourage ministers to become more and more left-wing, big state, nationalising certain industries, and not, instead of restoring our status quo before and trying to rebuild the small business environment. As a culture warrior, have you thought about that or tried to deal with that? Like, how is the conservative community going to come forward together and be like, we can't let the country descend into a banana republic with a massive nationalized system? How do we encourage the conservative community to go the other way toward putting back what we had before and trying to support that way?
See, where I think we're lucky on our side of politics is we're reasonably united. I'm seeing a lot of parallels on the left at the moment to about 100 years ago, when there was a big split in the Labor Party during the First World War, funnily enough, just before the other pandemic, where what happened was the far left, or who were the very open communists, had essentially infiltrated the party, and it led to a split, and the party didn't recover for years and years to come. The same thing's happening now, because you've got these far left-wing groups that have infiltrated the Labor Party. And look, I've never been a Labor supporter, but it pains me to see what's going on with them at the moment, because you've got some very sensible people, I think, in the Labor movement who are just being shouted down by the woke crowd who think it's more important to support green policies.
They raised a whole group of green children in order to get them to support Labor, and all they did was create an actual group of far left radicals who don't support Labor. They support what they taught them to as children, and they created it. It's their fault, but now they've got to deal with it.
And you know what? That's their problem. They've brought that on themselves, and good luck to them. Whereas I see on the right side of politics, one thing we're very good at is we don't eat each other alive, which the left will eat each other alive at any opportunity. Whereas we can have conversations with each other. And I mean, you have a look at the modern Liberal Party. I mean, when you've got a party that can contain, I guess to give two examples, so George Christensen and Malcolm Turnbull, and still those views, I think that says a lot about where we're at on our side of politics. And I think we're going to be okay. I can't see any possibility of a Labor government
I can
in the next 10 years.
We've got more problems than you think. I go to
not as many as there are on the left, though.
Events and everything, and over there, not only do the Liberals, most Liberal senators refuse to come to an event like CPAC, which is meant to be the meeting of all the conservative minds in Australia. That's the whole point of it. They get booed when they're mentioned on stage because of how far toward particularly Greens policies in renewables and their attitude to China. There's definitely a problem with some of the Liberals who appear to be ignoring their base, just like Labor ignores their working class base. A lot of Liberals
but we still get on with it though. It's because you got to remember, and I like that what John Howard said about the Liberal Party being, it's a broad church, of conservatives and liberals, and I think that is the case. And look, there's certainly some people within the party who are definitely to the left of, of what I think. And I'm not saying anything, but
no, well.
Yeah, but look, there are some interesting views in there, but I think what we're going to do, we keep it behind closed doors, and even where we disagree on something, we still find a way to work with each other and come. We don't always get our own way, and sometimes the Conservative won't get their own way against the more liberal member of the movement.
I wish we went back to the politics was designed to be an open forum of discussion and debate, including inside its own politics. So. I miss the days where of the sort of Winston Churchill era when you saw parties actually have it out with each other as far as trying to get to the best solution for a point. So much is the case these days where politicians either have no clue what they're talking about and have no interest in finding out because as long as they hold their position, they're happy. Or they will just bend and bow to whatever their mate says who's got more power in the area, so that as long as they can continue to hold their seat and get supported for the next election. And I don't like the way that Australia is going towards this bench-sitting politics where everyone is the same cardboard cutout for the safety of elections because they're frightened of the press. But I think we'll have to cross that bridge when we get to it. But we're running out of time. So, look, I'm going to ask you the question I actually warned you about, and I hope you give me an interesting answer. Look, if you could have dinner with anybody in history, live or dead, who would it be and why would you do it?
You know what? I've been struggling and I've had two in my head and I really can't sort of differentiate between them. So you're going to get two from me. So they're two very different ones. The first one is the Roman poet Catullus. He wrote some interesting love poetry. He also, I think he would have been great on Twitter because he wrote some fairly scathing rebuttals to some friends of his. He died young, but from what I can read, I think he would have been a really, really interesting person to have dinner and drinks with. I think it would have been a good night. But I guess the Australian historian in me says that probably Billy Hughes, who was, for those who aren't Australian, he was a Prime Minister of Australia during the First World War. Why I'd be interested in having dinner with Billy Hughes is I'd love to get his take on what's going on with the Labor movement at the moment, because he famously split the Labor Party and then split from the Labor Party to start the United Australia Party and then eventually what became the Liberal Party. So I'd be very interested to get his take on what's going on at the moment.
Well, thank you. That's absolutely fascinating. And those are great answers that you gave. And I'm sure people will be having a look at your poet. So thank you for joining us today. And people can follow you online. And do you want to, Spruik, where can we follow you online?
Absolutely. So on Twitter, at atheist_pastor, or on YouTube, it's just youtube.com/atheistpastor. Come and have a look, and it doesn't cost you anything to subscribe.
Well, I encourage everyone to go and check him out and listen to his fascinating discussions. Well, thank you very much for being on the show, and good luck with your culture warrior.
Thank you.
Get your pitchfork and off you go.
Absolutely. Fighting the good fight.
Thank you for joining us on Curtain Call. We are hosted by The Good Source, the home of conservative and libertarian voices. Help us fight fake news by following us online. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and all good podcasting services. If you enjoy this content, please like and subscribe.